We start on the shores of a shithole city. And no, not San Francisco. As under the waves of the Edge City River, a dopey scuba diver is hilariously crushed by a random log, and which promptly releases a long lost and hidden wooden mask. Elsewhere, over at the local banker Stanley Ipkiss tries to impress a redhead colleague by gifting her with tickets to join him at a concert tonight. But after she gives him an emotionally manipulative sob story about how her lonely mate would be left all alone all night, he agrees to give her the other one. Because he's such a nice guy, isn't she? But his best mate Charlie comes over and says you're a pathetic melt, son, and more useless with women than Elliot Rodger. So Chaz is going to take him out tonight to the opening of a fancy new club. But before he can say, how am I supposed to get in when I'm a total loser and keep giving away expensive tickets to social events, they both get raging lob-ons when they spot a hot totty new client whipping her hair around and walking over to him in slow motion. And because it's still the mid-1990s, she's allowed to be ogled and objectified by the cameraman, whilst poor old Stanley practically wets his pants. And after the smoking hot Tina bird asks for his help in setting up a new account, Stanley gets all flustered and makes a proper tit out of himself, while she positions her bag with a hidden camera inside to get a good view of the bank's layout, so her gangster boyfriend called Dorian can work out how best to rob the place, given he's not satisfied with all the wonga he's already got and so is instead planning risky side schemes under the nose of his psycho boss Nico.
Not a great plan.
Later, perpetual loser Stanley Ipkiss promptly gets taken advantage of and totally fleeced by a pair of cheeky mechanics, and who then proceed to loan him an old banger for tonight's party whilst his motor's in the shop. And after arriving at said party, he's further humiliated when his mate Charlie enters the club with a pair of girls, but he's accidentally left outside, before being tossed in the gutter like yesterday's turd. And just when he thinks his night can't get any worse, he's soon splashed by a giant puddle, before that top totty Tina bird turns up and just can't believe this guy seems to keep wetting himself every time they bloody meet. Anyway, after his old banger breaks down on the way home, he proceeds to break down himself when the entire car self-destructs because reasons. And before he can think about jumping over the side of the local bridge and totally topping himself, he sees someone has beat him to it, and finally finds a moment of purpose in life by trying to go and save a person in need. But unfortunately, the universe has totally trolled him, as it turns out to just be a floating mound of garbage with a shitty old mask on top. No! So after arriving home after the worst night out since my mate Dave got us all arrested after drunkenly lobbing a crate full of bubble bath into the River Thames for shits and giggles, he promptly gets bullied by his landlady after walking mud all over a new carpet, and also for watching cartoons too loud. And after taking his anger out on an innocent dog called Milo by lobbing a yellow disc at his face, he sees some old white bloke on TV talking about masks and stuff, which promptly makes him remember that one he found himself a few hours ago. So naturally, he pretends to mock the guy with his own silly mask. But he totally panics when said silly mask seems to stick to his face for a minute. Which is weird, because last time I experienced sticky stuff after having stiff wood thrust in my face, I was just given a 5-star rating and soon became a superstar on Grindr. Anyway, so curious to find out what the fuck that was all about, he thinks it's a totally good idea to put his face into a random mask what he just plucked out of a filthy garbage river and what also seems to supernaturally stick to faces. And before you can say, this'll end well, it immediately clasps onto his entire noggin and promptly turns him into some sort of tornado freak with a green face. And worse, makes him turn totally bald. And this wacky fella, what friggin' loves a catchphrase, starts smashing up the hallway with a giant fuck off mallet, which promptly wakes up the landlady, who seems to have found a washed up river garbage mask of her own, before whipping out a shotty and forces him to defenestrate himself like a riot cack. He then terrorises the neighbourhood for a bit, mainly by giving tight wedgies to local hoodlums, which by the looks of things must have resulted in catastrophic groin injuries for that poor fella, and then taunting them with bizarre balloon animal routines, before then ending his night of terror by taking total revenge on those two greedy mechanics who mugged him off earlier.
Oh shit, not good.
After waking up the next morning dazed and confused and with something akin to a full-blown hangover, he copes harder than a brain-dead liberal cat mum who just lost their life savings invested in that Hawk to a girl's recent shitcoin scam by convincing himself it was all just a dream. Until a local cop called Kellaway turns up at his gaff and asking if he saw or heard anything last night, given some cartoon rando in a green rubber mask broke in and gave an old lady a little fright. And after the cop insults his rather distinctive yet shitty pyjamas, Stan just says he has an inner ear problem and didn't hear nothing or nothing, so shut up about it already. Now late for work, he throws on some clobber and lobs that troublesome mask thing out the bleeding window, but his aim is so bent that it swings right back around and lands comfortably on his own sofa.
LOL!
Meanwhile, a ginger journo called Peggy Brandt tries to get the scoop on what happened at the garage from that Kellaway bloke, given one of the workers seems to have been brutally sodomised with some sort of metal pipe rod.
I don't care what universe you're from, that's gotta hurt.
After getting bollocked by his boss for being late, and also by Charlie for leaving him with two gorgeous girls just to go garbage diving in a filthy river, Stan discovers that Tina was a headline performer at the club that night, and probably could have used his client affiliation with her to get back in that evening, to be fair. Anyway, ginger journo Peggy Brandt then arrives to ask him what he knows about the anal adventures of two mechanics last night, given she saw that his car was the only one in the shop and thus traced it back to him and stuff. And after bonding over her being his favourite reporter and him once sending a popular and relatable letter into her column last year where he confessed to effectively being a lonely incel because women always tend to find him to be too nice, he almost thinks she seems too good to be true after she seems to be into him now she knows that he was a nice guy in the letter. Or some shit. Elsewhere, psycho mob boss Nico turns up to totally bollock Dorian for doing a bunch of bad things without his consent. Because almost getting his club shut down and also throwing local bankers into gutters just ain't fucking on, son. So naturally, he bends down and sticks his balls in his face, before then teeing off on top of his mouth and sending him a message even Tiger Woods couldn't ignore. After having a dream where he's suddenly a confident guy who gets the girl, he wakes up to find that it's not actually mid-90s Cameron Diaz kissing his head, but in fact, a stinky hairy mongrel licking his ear. And honestly, who hasn't been there the morning after the beer goggles wore off and you're left calling an Uber for an absolute rotter who you thought was an utter fox the night before? So, tired of being a total loser and spending his nights getting licked out by a dog but not in a good way, he throws that mask on again and hilariously beats Dorian's goons in robbing his own bank.
Nice.
Now arriving at the swanky club in style instead of a mashed up banger, the masked bloke soon takes a seat inside and watches Tina give a saucy performance, whilst giving me a right raging lob on. And again, because it's the mid-1990s, we get an entire sequence of a whole club full of blokes misogynistically leering at and objectifying a scantily clad young lady, who's played by an actress who was barely old enough to even drink when they shot this movie.
Then Cameron came on and wow, whoever thought that, I think she was 19 at the time, that she could keep up with Jim Carrey, and boy did she.
Wow.
And not wanting to be upstaged, the mask then does an absurd dance of his own, whilst upstairs, Dorian's goons return and say that green-faced cartoon bloke is totally the one what just beat us to our own robbery heist. Lol, what are the chances? So naturally, they head on down to smack a bitch up, whilst the mask snogs Tina so hard her bloody shoes pop off. And after they clear out the joint and demand their money back, what they totally failed to steal in the first place, they just proceed to try and yeet him, but are simply no match for a superpowered cartoon character, and are promptly just distracted by typical over-the-top Jim Carrey shenanigans, until he bloody legs it, and Kellaway arrests them all for failing to rob a bank. And the cop then finds a chunk of the mask's costume suit, what was cut off earlier in the gunfight, and turned back into that ip-kiss dipshit's pyjamas because reasons. The next morning, the relentless copper is already banging on his door, and after scrambling to hide the fuck ton of money what his naughty yet literal alter ego nicked last night, Kellaway asks why his unique pyjamas were found in the club on the night his own bank got robbed. But Stan just shrugs and says loads of us bankers have them PJs, bro, because they're totally in fashion right now, and you can pick yourself up a pair on www.stopcriticisingmyfashionsense.com. Finally arriving back at work looking more wrecked than the government health official,
Bruh.
he snaps back at his boss and finally stands up for himself for once in his life. And after Charlie tries to cheer him up by offering him a ticket to the fancy ball at that club again on Saturday, Tina arrives asking to set up a meeting with that mysterious masked bloke, who gets her so horny that her shoes pop off. Later, Dorian puts a 50 grand bounty on his new arch nemesis, while Stanley then tries to make sense of all his troubles by paying a visit to that old TV bloke from earlier, who reckons he's an expert on all things masks and shit. But unfortunately, he reckons his book was more of a metaphor, and can only guess that the wooden thing looks like it has shades of Norse mythology and is based on Loki, the god of mischief. And he only knows all that because his nephew's a right-raging Marvel superfan. Or some shit. Anyway, turns out it only works at night, given Loki's a night god apparently. So he just ends up making a tit of himself again and almost ends up being sent to a fucking loony bin. But luckily, the professor just settles for patronising him and irresponsibly indulging his clear mental illness by saying he should go to tonight's meeting with Tina as both himself and the chaotic alter ego, what he's totally convinced is real, and what robs banks and forces kisses on random women without their consent.
Sheer fucking hubris.
So later that evening, Stanley rendezvous with Tina, whilst Kellaway and his partner hide out in the bushes and call for backup after following him about all night. And after doing some more bonding on a small bench, he dives behind a giant bush and becomes that horny green-faced ghoul again. This the masked fella, what seems to love cultural appropriation, then dresses up like a misogynistic Frenchman and euphemistically tells her all the ways in which he's going to penetrate her tonight with his stiff and tasty croissant.
Mitch.
So also naturally, the two coppers promptly decide to pounce, given a creepy foreigner with coloured skin is now threatening to sexually molest a young woman in the middle of a public park. And before you can say, sounds like a typical Tuesday night in New York, well, if the cops even bothered to give a shit that is, he makes a bloody run for it. And they just can't believe it when they eventually climb over the wall and find he's bewitched a small army of their colleagues into performing a Cuban dance routine, and thus probably all guilty of some sort of cultural hate crime. Anyway, after they're all sufficiently distracted, he makes his escape and takes off the mask, before being picked up and driven away by that ginger journo broad. And after he confides in her about all the utterly mental shit what's been going on recently, and then going full Bane by whining about how no one cared who he was till he put on the mask, she tenderly tells him that he's more than just a nice guy who found a bizarre chunk of wood in a small garbage pile, and has more heart and courage than most other guys around here. And before he wonders if she might be a little too good to be true, Dorian and his goons burst in and take him hostage. Causing a shocking twist what no one could ever see coming. Turns out she's indeed too good to be true. And he just can't believe a beautiful girl would pretend to like him just for a 50-grand bounty, even though it's a well-known fact that gingers have no soul. And Dorian soon puts on the mask and becomes some sort of incredible Hulk cosplayer. And judging by those cheek fillers, seems to have also gone to the same plastic surgeon as Simon Cowell.
No. Yes.
So after they break into his gaff to steal the money back, what they didn't get a chance to nick the first time, his dog Milo runs after him, as they then dump Ipkiss right in Kellaway's lap so he can take the fall for all the naughty crimes in the city. The next morning, Tina visits him in jail, and just can't believe her local banker is secretly the masked fella what snogs her so good she can't possibly keep her shoes on for love nor money. And she asks him how on earth they can stop this psycho freak, well now he has the powers of the Norse god of naughtiness. But before he can finally kiss her himself, the guard interrupts him like a right cock-blocking git, and just leaving him lingering in a small cell with a right raging lob on.
Oh, that's cold.
But he then sees Tina get immediately chased down an alley out back and totally captured by Dorian, whilst the cock-blocking guard don't really give a stuff. But luckily, his little pooch Milo has been sleeping out back the whole time, and after bringing them up into his cell, he retrieves the keys and gets the heck out of Dodge, mainly by cuffing himself to Kellaway and sneaking out the front. Later, Dorian arrives at the fancy club ball and finally gets revenge on his kinky boss what loves to put his balls in his mouth, and then ties Tina to a tree and also a giant fuck-off bomb. Ipkiss, Kellaway and Milo then soon arrive to tear some shit up, and after Stanley tries to sneak inside but immediately getting himself captured, Milo jumps out of the car to go save his owner's dopey ass. Meanwhile, Tina tricks Dorian into demasking by using her feminine charms and begging him for a last kiss before they get blown to Kingdom Come, and then kicks said mask across the room, as Milo arrives just in the nick of time to become a cartoon mischief god himself. And taking advantage of the distraction, a newly courageous Stanley totally leaps at Dorian and promptly smacks the 7 shades of hell out of his naughty love rival, who proceeds to take more punches than Rihanna after implying boyfriend Chris Brown might be a bit of a woman-hating misogynist. Anyway, Stanley then demasks his pooch and pops it on himself, as the mask scares off the rest of the goons and then swallows the giant bomb, before finally yeeting that relentless Dorian fella by sucking him down a small drain, and bringing a whole new meaning to feeling a little flushed. And after demasking yet again, with the hopes of finally getting to snog that top totty tart played by a 19-year-old model, Charlie becomes an infuriating cockblocker himself when he bursts in with a bunch of cops to round up the rest of the baddies. Man, this guy just can't catch a break. And we end with the cops finally thanking their local dipshit banker for saving all their lives, well now they assume Dorian was the mask all along, before the gang head back to the local bridge to throw the magical wooden face thing back in the local river. And before you can say, no wonder the city is totally filthy when twats like this keep chucking fucking garbage into it, he finally gets a snog from that top totty Tina bird, what gives everyone she encounters right raging lob-ons, as Charlie promptly leaps into the river to try and claim the godlike powers of the mask, but hilariously gets beaten to it by a small canine. And that's it, that's the movie. Though my favourite part was when the mask pulled out a used condom when making balloon animals, and bringing a whole new meaning to whipping out a slimy trouser snake. And no fair, because when I accidentally did that, I just got put on a government watch list and banned from ever hosting kiddies' birthday parties ever again. But anyway, that's the plot and that's your lot. Consider ringing that bell thing so you don't miss any future recaps. Tell me if you like this flick in the comments if you have time, and I'll see you in the next one.